Hello and welcome to CTV. You're watching Month of the Woman, which is special programming that we are bringing to you in the lead up to International Women's Day. But we are also bringing you specialists and experts who are dealing in issues that affect young women and girls and boys as well in our community. And with me is Brenda Akankunda, who is the program manager in charge of investment for development at SEATINI, the Southern and East African Trade and Information Negotiations Institute, though the Ugandan branch. And today we'll be talking about the rights and dignity of casual workers in Uganda, which also includes women. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, Martha, for having me on the show.
And thank you for agreeing to speak to us. So, as has been tradition this month, is every time we host someone, other than the technical work that they do, before we delve into that, we want to know who is Brenda and how did you get into advocacy? What's that thing that sparked you into advocacy?
Okay, thank you, Martha. First of all, Brenda is a lawyer, and being into the legal field exposes me to the several violations, the circumstances that surround us. And what I observed was that there are a lot of injustices when it comes to economic, social, and cultural rights. And that sparked of my interest to not just do the advocacy in courts, but to stand out and speak on behalf of the women, on behalf of the very many youth that are out there in the community, so that their rights can be, the voices can be heard and their rights can be uplifted. So that was majorly what inspired me to join advocacy.
How long did it take for that passion? Because I believe so many people have that passion, but eventually acting on it. Was there a specific thing that triggered you?
Well, I think this is something that I personally developed at a very young age, after realizing what was happening, especially in our different communities. And then I can't say there's that specific time, but I think it was following certain events that I realized that if we, especially as women, do not come out to speak and defend our rights, to talk about ourselves, then there will be no one in our communities to defend us. So it was at that very young age that I actually realized that through different dialogues, debates, we could be able to uplift our voices as women and youth. And then eventually I realized that my main interest was in defending, speaking for social justice, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we do face as a country, and especially when you address issues to do with women. Because I realized that in most instances, women have been marginalized. And if we are not the ones speaking out there, then no one understands our plight unless it is us ourselves. So I realized that myself, and maybe if I could be out there as a voice, I could even help bring on board, fellow youth, fellow women on board to, all come together and appreciate the need for us to stand up and advocate for our rights.
Right. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the epitome, how would you say the journey is going so far towards achieving that?
I think it's a 50-50. I would say 5 to 10, because along the way you meet several challenges that pull you back. But I think it is a smooth ride. It's a smooth ride.
Yeah. That's quite encouraging. And now I would like to delve into some of the work that you're doing professionally. You mentioned fighting for the social and economic justice for women, and you mentioned that along the way you've found that many women are marginalized, but that also includes the youth and the men as well. If you can tell us a bit of on your journey towards that, what are some of the things that have stood out as the main reasons why that inequality is happening, or the marginalization of women is happening?
Okay, thank you, Martha. First of all, I want to speak out about the kind of work that I do. I do work with SEATINI Uganda. SEATINI is Southern and Eastern Africa Trade, Information and Negotiations Institute.
A very, very long title.
And we majorly work to promote pro-development, trade, fiscal and investment policies at all the different levels. Now, one thing that I personally observed is that when we talk about rights, social and cultural rights, and we look at issues to do with trade, investment, and tax, we think that these are isolated issues. But in actual sense, we cannot talk about investment without addressing issues to do with economic, social, and cultural rights, because those are intertwined. There's no way we can be able to achieve justice or to actually achieve development if the rights of the communities, of the host states, are being violated. So those two are merged in a way that most times we tend to think that when we're addressing issues to do with investment, it should all be about how much money is, this investment scheme bringing into the country. And that is why at SEATINI we are running a campaign that is dubbed Life Before Profit, because to us it is, there's need to prioritize the rights of the people before we look at even the development, the economic implication that comes with certain investments. And what we have realized, especially when you look at the policies that we have in place, you realize that most of those policies speak to the economic gains that come with investments, that come with trade. When in actual sense, what should be at the forefront is how are we protecting these communities? How are we protecting the women that are in this particular community? The other day we saw women crying on TV saying they've been displaced from their land. They don't know where they'll go. And there's even the social aspect that is even attached to these particular issues. For instance, some people own land, and to them land is not just about money, but there's that cultural attachment that they do have with the land. So when we just come because all in the quest of investment and development, and we just put away, think that maybe the alternative that we are taking is the best way, then at the end of the day, a lot of people are being affected, and especially women and youth, because those are the ones that are at the grassroots in most instances.
Yeah, I understand that SEATINI, in your work, you always collaborate with different other CSOs. And like you rightly mentioned, you're now pushing that campaign of Life Before Profit. There's also a campaign which I understand that you're pushing as well to encourage government and investors to respect the dignity and rights of women, especially those who are doing casual work. At what point, or what pushed you to start that campaign? What findings did the research that you did, because SEATINI carries out a lot of research, that eventually led you to pushing that campaign?
Okay, thank you. First of all, like I had emphasized, we do work on issues to do with investment. So we tend to reach out to certain investment schemes, look at the conditions in which those investment schemes are operating. And in 2020, we did a certain field work, went to a certain big investment, especially these agricultural plantations.
Because we are an agricultural country, and it's easier to take people. We have land.
And we keep saying agriculture is the backbone of the country, so it is very important to interest ourselves in that field. But when we got there, the findings were quite scary, because we got an opportunity to share with some of the workers that are in the fields. And then a lot of issues were raised. And I'll just give you an example, for instance, just to start with an issue to do with even the contract itself, the contract that you're being issued. And then these workers told us how there are unfair contractual obligations, because you do not even have a right to read through the contract, get to understand what are the details. But
so you're given a contract, but you're not given the opportunity to read what's in your contract.
Exactly, and all you have to do is sign, because apparently maybe these investment schemes are trying to comply with the employment laws of the country, but you are not even given the liberty to choose. That not only being the issue, looking at even the working conditions, the pay that they receive, the fact that they're not even given enough protective gears. We had a chance to talk to a lot of women who tell you that the chemicals that they use, for instance, in those plantations, spill on their bodies, and the harmful impact that has on the bodies, especially of a woman. Besides that, there was even a very scary issue of how they are forced to cohabit with the male workers that are in the field. So a lot of
and
issues.
I believe that affects both the men and women as well, because if you came to work, you left your wife at home, and they're forcing you to take on your colleague as a wife.
At the end of the day, it affects both of you. And for us, it became a very emotional issue. And we actually decided to even take it before the courts of law, because we do believe that with rights, the end goal will be you being able to access remedy. So right now we have a case in court on behalf of some of the women casual laborers that we had an opportunity to meet. And even when they shared their plight, most of them lost their jobs because apparently they do not even have that right to even speak out. So there are those very unfair conditions that at the end of the day triggered us to even call upon the government to demand that the dignity of the people, the livelihoods should be improved, because as a country, we want to see how we can best improve the livelihoods of all the people in the communities, and especially women.
Right.
So if we keep, we realized it was important for us to address this particular issue so that maybe their voices could be heard, maybe they could get better working conditions, and that is why we took it up.
Yeah, and it's very important to have advocacy indeed. So you mentioned that there are places you went to. I'm curious to know how many communities did you go to, and the different industries or companies, how widespread was your research and the study findings that you did, the study that you did?
Okay, first of all, maybe just to reiterate, we do work on investment, but specifically we put the focus on the agricultural land-based investments. Yeah, so in the different periods, we visit different communities, because we have been to Kalangala, we have been to Mobende, we have been to Mbale, Gurulila. So it is not just on a small scale. We have visited these different biggest plantation schemes that we have in a country and seen the working conditions that are in those particular areas, and then it is what informed our research that we did carry out. Yeah,
and when you go to the plantations, for example, that you mentioned, and you keep emphasizing, which is very key, investment, for the benefit of the viewer, are these just local investments that you're looking at, or they are both foreign and local investment firms that you're looking at?
No, our niche is not just into local or foreign, but investments as a whole. And that includes the foreign direct investments, that includes the local investments. So when we reach out, we don't like specify just a small group, or which is maybe the local investments. But in most instances, we have realized that because of maybe the capacities, most of the, I would maybe give you an example, most of the largest plantations that we do have in a country, if you talk about maybe coffee, sugar, oil, palm plantations, they are mostly owned by the foreign investors. So you'll find at the end of the day, maybe when you look at our website and the work that we've put out, you'll find that maybe most of the work tends to go to touch the foreign investments. But our interest is not just into the foreign direct investments, but rather the investment as a whole for the country.
Right. Investment is, like you mentioned, it's for the country as a whole. But and then when you compare the research that you've done, because of course SEATINI covers Southern and Eastern Africa, how would you say Uganda is doing in terms of ensuring that the investors that come in respect the lands of the laws of the land?
That's a very good question. I think that, and actually one of the things that we have really tried to stress out is we can only say that Uganda is absolutely protecting the rights of the citizens if they start with the issue of to do with policies, because it is the policies that guide the investments. It is the legal frameworks that do guide. And what we have realized is that Uganda has policies protecting investment, regulating investments in Uganda, but Uganda has also signed agreements at the international level, international investment agreements. But when you look, for instance, we have an investment code that was amended in 2019. When you look through it, it does not have any clause that speaks about human rights, that speaks about the protection of the people. So we would say that even government itself has probably not come out to defend the rights, because that is the starting point. We cannot run to court when we do not even have a strong guiding framework that protects the investment. So I think that I wouldn't say Uganda is performing well when it comes to protecting the communities. And that is why we keep emphasizing out there that there is need to have a strong legal framework that protects investment, especially the land-based investments. So we have those clauses missing within our investment policies. We have international investment agreements that only focus on the protection of the foreign investments. And still, even when you look at most of the investment agreements that we have as a country, you realize that none of them speaks to human rights. I know a lot of people have said that, yes, we do have a constitution that has a whole chapter 4 that speaks about human rights. Yeah. But you do need to understand that most of these, in these investments, we are dealing with people who are not even within the jurisdiction of Uganda, that cannot be legally bound by maybe our national constitution. But if we have a very strong investment code, then it will be the protecting framework. At the moment, there's an ongoing call to broaden the market. For instance, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. Yeah. In this particular year, they will be negotiating an investment protocol. So if we have a weak investment guiding framework, it means that it even affects how the investment, our contribution to the investment protocol. Because as a country, we cannot say, let's, for instance, advocate to see human rights clauses within the investment protocol, yet we have not even put it in our own investment laws. But I think that what Uganda could actually do is, for instance, make our law, make our investment code a blueprint that will guide even the international negotiations when it comes to investment. I think that way we can be able to say, oh, Uganda is actually making a great effort when it comes to the protection of communities in these land-based investments.
Right, and it's organizations such as yours that always help to bring out these issues, advocate for them so strongly, eventually forcing government or working with government to see that something is done. What are some of the organizations that you're working with to ensure that this is done, the call to action that you're making, and how is the journey going?
Okay, thank you. First of all, we do believe in partnerships. We understand that we cannot just speak as SEATINI, but we need a collective voice.
Yeah, and indeed, you've demonstrated that in your previous work.
And we belong to different coalitions and consortiums. We are a member of the Uganda Consortium on Corporate Accountability. We are a new member to the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. We work with partners around. We have worked with women organizations like FIDA. We work with GRAIN. We work with several organizations that I can't really mention each one of them. But we have these different campaigns, like for the research that we did carry out, and even for the press conference that you mentioned in the start. We've worked with SEFRAT on this particular case that I have told you, and GRAIN. So there are several organizations that really we can't mention, because at the different levels, we do understand the importance of working with these particular organizations, and even at the subnational levels, because we don't just work at maybe work with the organizations at the national level, but even when we go to the grassroots, we partner with those organizations at the subnational level, like the NGO Forum, Karangara, Mubende, Mbale, so that at the end of the day, we are able to have a collective voice that speaks towards advocating for the rights of the citizens. The rights of the citizens, rightly said, not just women, but the citizens as a whole. There's, you mentioned the coalition that calls for corporate accountability. And I think a few months back, you put out a documentary which had workers from
who are employed by people from a specific nationality that had been abused. Most of them, they're not given employment contracts. Earlier you mentioned those who are given contracts, but they are not even read. These ones are not even given contracts. They don't even have work IDs. They don't even have uniforms. They don't have anything that shows that they are workers. So I'm wondering, in such a case, how do you advise some of those people when you meet them?
Okay, thank you. We believe in three things that for communities to be able to access justice. We believe that, first of all, we need the corporations to understand, to be accountable for such injustices. But most importantly, we want citizens. We would wish to see citizens holding these different corporations accountable. And then the third one is we would want to also look at the citizens accessing remedy. Now, when we meet these communities, we try to stress out those 3 points, because we don't just meet the victims, we also meet the corporations and try to have dialogue with them, look at how they can strengthen dialogue, how they can appreciate issues to do with corporate accountability. But then when we meet maybe some of these victims, we tell them, we make them understand the need to hold, for instance, if their rights are being violated, because like you clearly state them out, we make sure that they speak out, they use their voices to speak out to these corporations. And lastly, we also ensure that we empower them to be able to seek or demand for justice. And that is where we work with maybe...
Doesn't that sound very idealistic when you say a bit, when you say you speak to them to speak out? Because I know and I understand there are communities where speaking out could even be threatening to someone's life.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true, but sometimes, and this is something we've actually tried out, you realize that even some of these corporations, they don't take particular things. For instance, now the issue to do with contracts, because I'll give you an example. When we visited a certain community, and we realized there were all these different challenges. Now, this is a sister company where its mother company is based in Kenya. So when we reached out, when we put out our call, our demands, we were called by the mother company and said, look here, let's have dialogue. Let's discuss these issues. So that is why we believe that it's not just as maybe you put it, but even when we engage in dialogue, even when, and most importantly, when you hold them to account, then on a scale of 5 to 10, maybe, some of them will respond. Some of them will address maybe some of those particular issues. Like there's an issue of workers not getting contracts, but at least when we try, then we get to see that yes, they are getting contracts, but they are unfair contractual obligations. Mm-hmm. And now there's a step. Yeah. So now we advance from that step and see how best can we see maybe some of these corporations being able to, even give contracts that are actually fair. But I was also going to state out the last point on the other question that you had asked me on issue to do with access to remedy. When we go to these different communities, we have established a relationship with the local governments themselves, and specifically with the labor offices. We look at how we can, because we also did realize that there's an issue of lack of awareness, or limited awareness, actually.
Even in the labor offices?
No, not with the labor officers, but with the communities.
Yeah?
Some workers are facing these challenges, but they don't know maybe if this is a dispute that arises out of maybe a work relationship. Where am I supposed to take the issue? If I have sustained an injury at work, what is supposed to be the next step? So we've realized that there's also a need to bridge that gap of limited awareness, and we work closely with the labor offices. So when we get to these communities, we ensure that there's a dialogue between the workers and the labor officers to tell them to even stress more on their rights so that they get to understand and even create that strong relationship. And for me, I have seen that it's something that works, though we do understand that there's also limited capacity at especially the subnational levels. But it is a step that we keep taking, and we hope that maybe at the end at some point, our demands could eventually be met. We could see even the labor offices being expanded so that they can be able to support the communities to access justice.
In the studies that you've done in the different communities and with the investment firms that you've talked about, how would you gauge the compliance of investors to labor laws, to respecting the rights and dignity of especially the casual laborers?
Well, I would honestly say it is so low. There's a lot that needs to be done. Clearly, most of the investment schemes are not into issues to do with rights, environmental rights, human rights.
So that's why the other campaign comes in, putting human life above, or profit above human life, and you want to reverse the trend.
And it is very important because most of, you see, even just by the mere mention of the word investment, you have put in maybe certain resources, and at the end of the day, you want to gain profits from those resources. And I will tell you that you realize most corporations don't, well, I know there are certain standards. For instance, the government put it out that you need to carry out like an environmental impact assessment. So they will try to comply, not because they appreciate the need, but because there is need to comply with that particular law. And that is why I was telling you that it actually starts from the government itself, because now that we've seen a lot of them trying to carry out an environmental impact assessment, even when they probably don't believe in the need for an EIA. But if our investment code, for instance, had a clause that talks about a human rights impact assessment, that means even the corporations would be would take it upon themselves to carry out such a human rights impact assessment. If there was a strong clause that says, for instance, once it is realized that there are unfair working conditions, then your investment license could be terminated, then we would see maybe increased compliance amongst these corporations. But then there's a lack of that political will, and I think it is what has, in the end of the day, even limited the compliance of these particular corporations.
Indeed, and what you're saying now brings to mind an idea that maybe the reason why we don't even respect that could be the reason why even the workers that we send out outside of Uganda, especially when they are doing casual work, they are not respected in the countries they are going to, because at home, like you mentioned, we still have a lot of work to do.
Of course, you see, most of these principles need to be reciprocated. So if you're not doing what is right, if you're not putting human rights to the front, it means you cannot say when maybe your workers get outside Uganda, then your major interest in them will be trying to see that their rights are respected. Maybe the right is, now that we are taking out these many people, how much money are they paying to the country in terms of taxes? How much are we gaining as a country? And that is why there's need to change that narrative. There's need for us to appreciate that even for investment to grow, by the way, you need to put forward the rights of the communities. Environmental rights is something that we usually leave out, but we need to forefront those particular rights. And at the end of the day, there will even be a bigger return on investment because communities will be empowered, which is very important in that aspect.
Okay, and when we return from this very short break, we'll delve deeper into that and go also into the findings that you have had at SEATINI Uganda. You're watching SEETV Month of the Woman, where we are bringing you specialists and experts in different avenues who are dealing in issues that affect young women and girls. And the conversation is to try to bridge the gap where there's gender inequality. So we're not just addressing issues of women and girls, but also issues that affect men. We are going for this short break. Don't blink.
The big debate is back. Bigger, bolder, reloaded. Whether it is securing your future, holding fast to the people power, or the promise of a one Uganda, one thing is certain: the big debate is on.
So why don't you respect the memories of doctors for this?
We have already addressed the issue of increment.
How many people have ever been convicted? Okay.
It's the way the politics plays in cabinet.
So now why are they asking for the statement?
Follow mainstream conversations on current affairs and leading policy debates in Uganda.
It is in our interest to handle arrested people very nicely.
Right here on The Big Debate.
Let me finalize this. I was quiet. I was quiet.
It's a hard-hitting talk show on development issues in the political and social-economic arena. Discussions that inform policy and trigger high-level dialogue. Now showing on CTV. Don't blink.
Three words: convenience, passion, and pride. Introducing the KCCAFC app, made for you to interact with the best football club in Uganda, giving you the latest news, transfers, membership options, merchandise online shop, match ticket booking, and fan zone instant messaging. To download the beta app, go to Google Play Store on your Android and search for KCFC. Download the app, sign up, and voila, you're in. Yes, the app is only available for Android users. iOS users, we are coming soon. The KCCFC app, inspired by you, made for you.
Now Ugandans, as you know, us tuli bantu abatayagala kututegerera wadde. That's why at CTV we're working tirelessly to make that possible. Now my name is Tim Cash, and alongside one DJ Frost we bring you the brunch time request Lubabu.
You make me jump like kangaroo.
I really love Levixo. Woman, you're just a bonge.
Dance for me, chicky bong, my number one. You're not you the ginger. If you know how you the cause you drop.
Now this show happens every single weekday between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m.
Now showing on CTV. Don't blink.
Let's hop in my Maserati.
Welcome back from that short break, and thank you for staying with us here on CTV. I'm Amelia Nakitimbo, and with my guest, Brenda Akankunda from SEATINI, who is talking to us about the rights and dignity of casual laborers in Uganda, especially the women who are mostly affected. Before we went for a break, because SEATINI deals in a lot of research and field studies, she had told us that their findings are that the respect of the rights and dignity of casual laborers or casual workers in Uganda is very, very low. And if you can help us understand that, because I think it all starts with how, as a family, even how you treat maybe your shamba boy or your housemaid, and then eventually it grows. Where are we, and how are we comparing to the other countries in the region?
Okay, thank you, Martha, for that question. I'll just pick out a few examples of some of the studies that we've done. And let me start with maybe one that we did in Karangara. And our findings were, first of all, we looked at majorly the working conditions, since here we're dealing with casual laborers. And one of the issues that we realized was the fact that there are low wages. And you do understand that when you talk about livelihoods, wages or how much amount or how much you're bringing on board is very important, yeah? So we realized
at a time when the prices of goods are going high.
Yeah, but I'll tell you that there's a certain lady that shared with us a story of how she is earning 2,000 Ugandan shillings.
Is that per
now
day?
Now you do
month?
Understand per month. You do understand,
yes.
You do understand that that is so low to even buy a bar of soap.
No, even transport to and from work.
So exactly. So meaning that at the end of the day, it is actually not in any way anything.
She's working for free.
For free.
Yeah.
The other thing is, now to do with issues of women, you do understand that there's maybe need for maternity leave for a woman that is to give birth. But what we also realized is that they are denied maternity leave or the paid annual leave, which is a requirement under the employment laws of Uganda. And so when it happens, for instance, you know, the picture it paints out is as though a woman getting pregnant or a woman giving birth is a crime, because it means you have to make a decision. You either take a break and then you lose the job, or you actually decide to stay on the job, which is practically impossible. So at the end of the day, you'll find a lot of them losing their jobs simply because they have to, you know, give birth, or they are not in the right state to do the work at the moment. The other major issue is, like I talked about, the issue to do with forced cohabitation. And actually, they shared an experience with us that men are lined up, and then you as a lady that has just joined, you're supposed to pick one person from them.
Is that prevalent?
Which is actually so absurd, because, and it is mandatory, because at the end of the day, and one other thing that we actually realized
before you even go to that other thing, this issue of forced cohabiting in companies, is it maybe like a specific company doing it, or are there different companies from the field studies that you did?
No, we only found it in one particular company, and it is upon that we actually decided to take on a case to court, which is now before the high courts of Uganda. But I was going to link it to a certain point that we realized that they don't actually employ, like I've said, it is within Kalangala, so they don't employ the community members of Kalangala, because maybe someone will feel that the working conditions are unfair and it will be easy for them to quit. So what they do is they get people from different regions, people from Kasese, people from the east, from deep in the west, and then those are the people that they bring to work. And if you've been to Kalangala, you do understand that it is an island.
Yeah, it's not easy to live. So they want vulnerable workers, in short.
Exactly. When we actually went to the field, and after we had engaged with them, most of them lost their jobs. So one of the people...
Because they spoke to you? Exactly.
So we had to take one of the people to transport them back to their home, which is, I think, Kapchora. Surprisingly, they didn't even know what is the route back home, because they had just been picked from wherever they were in their homes, deep in those regions, and just brought. And they don't, it literally becomes difficult for them to even leave that job, because they are more privileged to be working, even if they're earning very less, than if they decided to quit. So, Martha, if I decide to actually break down all the issues that we have realized, it is they're quite emotional. And we have another project that focuses on improving coffee value chains. So we also engage with the different communities on the incomes that they do earn, because rights are not just human rights, but they're also economic rights. Yeah. And women will tell you that there's some that shared an interesting experience on how they actually have to steal the coffee from their husbands to sell it in the nights. Because
stealing from their husbands, they are working together with their husbands?
Yes, exactly. Because they are working together, they actually do most of the work. You do understand that it's, especially in these communities, it's usually the women that are actually doing the work. But at the end of the day, they don't even have the capacity to get at least 1% from that particular coffee that they are selling. And most of them decide to actually go on and maybe take the coffee. And now what happens is they will not sell it directly, so they are selling it to maybe these middlemen, and so they will not even be able to get the economic gain.
Yes, yes.
That because the middleman will tell you, I am only giving you this particular amount. So there are a lot of challenges and pressure that women face in these particular communities, not just human rights, but even their economic rights, because the other issue is to do with land. Now that is a very growing issue that we actually need to, expound on, because in most cases, we've realized that when you look at, for instance, women ownership of land, the percentage is at 7%. That is to the
population.
Exactly. So now that gives you that the picture. Even when it comes to selling land, women have less say. I know that the government has really made an effort to ensure that, especially spouses, if maybe there is a transaction on land, all the spouses need to be, especially the woman has to come on board and also give their consent. But it is still a big challenge. We've seen certain communities, men are selling the land and the women are the ones that are crying out there, thinking of what they are going to, where they're going to get that little income to feed their children. In November last year, we were in Mubende, and these women were sharing experiences on how they lost their land to the, because they, I think, explored gold within their community.
By themselves, or?
No. The government.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of them have lost their land now. So they were actually crying out, saying, where do we go? What is the next thing that we're going to do? So there are quite a lot of challenges. If you go to those gold mining communities, look at, especially the artisanal small miners, they're using mercury. You probably very much understand the health impact that it has on a woman.
Yeah.
And it is them that are doing that particular work. So there are quite a lot of challenges that you cannot even just break down in maybe an hour or less. But we also believe that justice could be attained if we take up action as a civil society, working together with government, and we see how we can be able to bring such corporations that are doing maybe some of the things that I've mentioned to account. Yeah.
Right, and that's why we are having this conversation, because I believe that every time you hold a conversation, it sparks an idea in someone's mind and someone is listening, and that's also part of the action that we are doing. But I got a light bulb moment as you were telling me earlier about respecting the rights of casual laborers and talking about maternity leave, and I thought about even in our homes, the people that you have, because I don't know how many homeowners, for example, give contracts, or how much pay we give, because just like, I think your home would be like maybe a small company, because you're now employing someone, you're giving them, I don't know, maybe SEATINI should also expand its research to households, because if you're talking about economic empowerment and investment, I think there's something in that as well. Have you considered that?
Wow, that's quite an issue, and that is why actually we do believe that there's a great need for a minimum wage. We think that even when it is put out there, then it will even start from the households themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we cannot talk about casual workers in isolation of even at the household levels. And that's why I started with telling you that we have an aim or an interest in seeing household incomes being increased. And we know that that can be done through easing or putting in place services or situations that are comfortable for even these people at the household levels to work and get a certain pay that will help them to elevate or to improve their livelihoods.
Yeah, because when they win, everyone wins. Because
Exactly.
I think the argument right now is, how do I pay maybe more than 150 or more than 200 when myself I'm earning maybe 800,000 shillings? So when the pay goes up, everyone wins at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So in that, where are we? What do you wish can be put in place? We're talking about the minimum wage, for example. I don't know when we last had a serious conversation about that, and maybe that's why we do not even consider that, or we haven't seen any action being done in that regard.
Let me try to internalize your question. What should be done? Okay.
Yes, to improve the rights and dignity of casual laborers in Uganda.
Okay. Firstly, and most importantly, is we need to work around our policies. So one, we need to look at our guiding legal framework when it comes to investment, which is the Investment Code of 2019. There's a great need for it to be reviewed so that it addresses issues to do with human rights protection. That is very key. Two, we understand that Uganda as a country is a signatory to certain, like the UN guiding principles. So there's a very great need for Uganda to mainstream the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights within our national laws, because we have internalized them and we realize the best practices set out in those guiding principles. If we can be able to...
What do you consider the best practices now that should be emphasized upon?
Well, like I've been putting it out there, to have a strong law that speaks about protection and promotion of human rights and access to remedy. So
one that is not easy to manipulate.
Exactly, it's not. We do commend the government. Last year, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights was put out. We do understand that this is a very important document, that if it's actually implemented, then it would be very, it would be a very strong document that will help to promote business and human rights within the communities, within the investment schemes. However, there's what we call the best practice laws, and then the binding laws that we have. So when you look like at the National Action Plan, it is a best endeavor. So it is upon you. You either implement it or you don't. So, but we also have binding laws like the investment code. That is why we say it is important that we mainstream some of these principles within the binding laws, because at least there someone will be bound to either comply or they will be held liable for not complying. 3, on the issue of land, which is very key, still to talk about the best practices, we have the African Union guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments that clearly stipulates some of the principles that should guide land-based investments, which is, by the way, the main challenge that we are facing today, because most of these violations that we are seeing are within the land-based investments. So there's need for us as a country to mainstream some of those particular clauses that are within the land-based investment of the AU and have them within our investment clause. Actually, we think that it is very important to have an independent, a standalone law that speaks only on the protection of land-based investments. Because when we just say investments, you're going to get lost along the way. Even where we are seated today, this is an investment, okay? Yeah. And if we are not clearly focusing on land-based investments, then we just look at it in a nutshell, and we don't, at the end of the day, give a lot of focus to it. So we think it is important that we even have a standalone law that talks about land-based. And lastly, on the issue of gender, yeah, we also feel it is very important to mainstream issues of women and gender particularly, okay, not to specify, within our investment agreements, because that way we shall have investment laws that are inclusive of, that speak to the rights or the demands of the women themselves, the men, and all the different categories.
I imagine that there you mean things like specifying maternity leave.
Exactly.
Maybe issues of some people have very painful or problematic monthly periods, which could also be included there. Though I had wanted to take you back to the land-based investment, I had wanted you to break it down even further, because even while it's in English, it could still be too technical. When you talk about land-based investment, what is that exactly?
Okay. So the best way I could break it down is, we do understand what investments are, and we understand that at the moment we have investments in different aspects or in different perspectives.
Right.
We have people that are investing in real estate.
Yeah.
We have people that have invested so much in health. We have investments in education, but we also have investments that are practiced on land majorly. And maybe one of the major examples I would give is investments in agriculture.
Which are the most common right now? Or which,
in Uganda,
including the grassroots people?
Yeah, the most common, talk about sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have very huge plantations of sugar in Uganda. We have big plantations of coffee in Uganda. We have big plantations of oil palm
and tea.
Yeah, so that is why we are speaking about those. And majorly because most of them are on a large scale. Now, being on a large scale ideally means you're even involving very many people. And in a community that has more than 25 people, it is very key that you address issues of rights, because in most instances you realize maybe if you're operating in a space of 10 people, probably it is easy to meet each and everyone's demands. But in such investments that are operating on a large scale, most of the times that is why we see such issues of workers coming up so much, as opposed to maybe investments that are operating on a small scale. So that is why we think there's a lot of focus that needs to be put on. But also the other issue is because we have seen the increasing issue of land grabbing, which we cannot run away as a country.
That is attributed to investment?
Exactly. Yeah. When you look at most of the issues to do with land grabbing that we have in a country, most of them are attributed to investments, because a particular investor has come to a certain community, maybe in Kiliandongo, in Mobende, and then 1,000 people are being displaced from their land. And that is why it is a growing issue, because these are the day-to-day challenges that we are facing as a country.
Yeah, and I think with the coalition that holds corporates accountable, I saw a story or a case that you had highlighted where this woman had her land. I think it had come from the family, and they had equally apportioned land to all of them. And then some of these people, I don't know if they connect with the brothers or not, they came and cleared her land of sugarcane, her sugarcane actually, because they wanted to take more of the land to the investor. I think that speaks to some of those issues that you're highlighting.
Exactly, and those are the main challenges that I have told you. And just to also re-echo this, people have started looking at land as, an economic future. And that is all that they see in land. And you as a woman that thinks, oh, this is land where my great-grandfather was buried, these issues are actually being phased out. But like I shared a story.
So that means that the cultural value and social value is being broken.
Exactly. And yet some people have even the cultural attachment to these particular properties. They think, as I was telling you a story of that was put in Daily Monitor, of a woman that was crying, looking at the burial ground where her father was buried, and then she said, what am I going to do with this? Because even if this person is taken elsewhere and placed somewhere else in maybe a certain camp, they'll still have that cultural attachment to this particular piece of land. So that is why the issue of land is a very sensitive issue that you actually, and since I have told you that most of the land grabbings, land displacements that we are seeing are attributed to investment, that is why it is very important to talk about land-based investments, because we think that they are the root cause of these challenges that we are seeing in these communities.
Because of what is on the land, more people are targeting the land, and that also brings us to the issue that I had highlighted earlier, that already we have just 70% of the entire population of Uganda being women who are landowners. And I think from some of the issues that you've highlighted is when this grabbing happens, then eventually it's the women. Okay, everyone, of course, is affected, but why we have conversations on gender equality is that women tend to be disproportionately affected by issues that affect communities. Because even if the man is a land owner, or he's somewhere out there working, if he's not able to earn, then the woman doesn't have anything to bring on the table.
Exactly, Martha. And let me actually give you another instance. When you look at this year's theme for the national budget, it talks about commercial agriculture. Now, if you try to understand it, it literally means practicing agriculture on a large scale. And with that aim, or with that aspiration to have agriculture on a large scale, it means you are the one that actually supports, let's have a coffee plantation that is seated on 9 square miles. And remember with that, it means a lot of people, because when you look at land ownership today in Uganda, most of them have land on a small scale. So it means for you to realize that, it literally means that a lot of people have to be taken away from a particular community for you to be able to get that particular piece of land that you do want. You get it, Martha?
Yes.
So that is why actually for us we say, why do we have to talk about commercial agriculture? Let's instead speak about maybe commercialization of agriculture. Martha that owns land on a small scale should be able to use her land and maximize production on that particular piece of land. And at the end of the day, she'll be able to improve her livelihood.
Instead of selling
sending her away
yes.
to bring on board just one investor that is going to own all this particular land. And then at the end of the day, people are being displaced from their communities.
When we come back from this short break, you'll tell me how practical that suggestion of commercialization of land is going, and with the conversations that you're engaging in society. You're still watching CTV, Month of the Woman, here on CTV, and we're talking about issues that affect young women and girls in community in the lead up to International Women's Day. But as the name suggests, of course, these are conversations that we're going to be having until the end of the month. So we're going for a break, as I'd mentioned, so don't blink.
We entertain you. Ngawe tukuwate. Amanya shami manja, omobwat President Birabiri Mokaga, akabonero court. Nanga wento naliya nafuka ikankomya aliya one but tikutemo olwaleero.
Naye tubasuubiza ntugenda kubanga tuli mu bitundu ebyenjawulo.
Ani yayambadde obulungi. Kakoye kyakaze ku mulembe. Ne gown ya black erina tiara ya black.
Tiara.
English of my kind. Tiara.
I feel the beat.
You feel the beat?
Yeah.
Feeling the beat. Show bagiyita situations ko ground. This is a buffet kyagala kyoliyako.
Beera ko ku CTV totemye.
Don't blink.
Now showing on CTV. Don't blink. As we embark on a journey to realize our full potential, we all need expanded minds and limitless possibilities. We need to be accurately informed. CTV is your growth partner. With reliable, in-depth news, we tell the story from all perspectives. We bring you the story in real time. Catch our comprehensive daily bulletins in Juba Egolodie at 7 p.m. and PM edition at 9 p.m. CTV, don't blink. Since 1963, this shirt has united fans and players across the country. It is more than just an article of clothing. It is a sense of pride for us as we catch the kinetic action. In the heat of the competition, we stand with our champion. This shirt brings us together. CTV becomes the principal shirt partner for KCCA FC. We are committed to the game, to bridge the gap and bring you closer to the awesome team you love. KCCA FC, more than just a club. CTV, don't blink.
Welcome back from that short break. This is CTV Month of the Woman, special programming that we are bringing to you in the lead up to International Women's Day. As you know, CTV is a channel that has set out to address issues of women in society. And today we're talking about the plight of casual laborers and especially women, because when human rights are not respected and also economic rights, like Brenda mentioned before we went for a break, then it affects the performance of community and society at large and the performance of the economy. And earlier she had hinted on what we need to do in order to ensure that we walk that journey. She mentioned something that we cannot overemphasize, that as Uganda, we are doing really badly when it comes to respecting the rights and dignity of casual laborers, and a lot needs to be done. But I'll still throw the ball back into your court so that we still talk about the same issue, because just this one conversation is not going to end, or maybe someone has just joined us and they had not heard what you mentioned. So there are different actors in all this, and we say that casual work starts even right in our homes before going on to the different levels, which involves even, you know, investors that come in here. So what do we need to do, starting from my home and then to the investors?
Okay, thank you, Martha. For this particular issue, I see there are actually three major actors. There's the citizens ourselves, there's the state, and then there's the investors, because we are attributing all this to the investors, yeah?
Though I think it should be made clear, because in Uganda, when we talk of investors, we tend to imagine they are foreign investors and we forget the local investors.
That's really not true. And yeah, I understand, because like I said, because most of those foreign investors are maybe practicing it on a large scale, or they are putting in more resources that it can easily be identified. But when we talk about investors, it's not just simply maybe the foreign investors. We have the local investors, we have the domestic investors, those within the ESC region, and then we have the foreign, and then we also have the state itself. So to start with ourselves as citizens, we need to appreciate the fact that we are entitled to certain rights, yeah? And we know that there are a lot of injustices that have been faced, especially when it comes to maybe accessing justice, or maybe accessing the judicial services. But we cannot run away from the fact that it is our obligation. We have that right. So whenever our rights are violated, we need to take it upon ourselves to actually reach out to who could help. Maybe you may not have the financial resources, but we have organizations like we have FIDA, Uganda Women's Association of Lawyers, that is there to help women in these, even in the particular homes that are being faced with the domestic violence. So we need to take it upon ourselves to always understand that it is our right to speak out whenever we are facing these certain violations. Now, with the investors, and I want to bring the state last. With the investors, the main issue is to do with compliance. Investors need to comply with the existing binding agreements or laws that they are in place, for instance, to do with environmental impact assessment, to do with maybe tax compliance. So it is upon the investors, it is upon them, they should take it upon themselves to comply with the existing laws. And now that is where my issue comes in, that how about where the law is silent?
Yeah.
So that goes to the states. The states, like I'd already put it out, but maybe to just re-echo it, one, it is important that the states, we call upon the states to, first of all, review the investment code that we have in place so that it addresses issues to do with human rights. Two, to mainstream issues of land-based investments, of the African Union large-scale guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments within our national laws. Three, to mainstream issues of the United Nations guiding principles within our national binding laws. And then four, to review the existing international agreements, because like I said, we have certain bilateral investment treaties and agreements with different states like Uganda, Netherlands, Uganda, Germany. So it is important that the government reviews all of them that we do have in place and ensures that they all incorporate aspects of human rights. And then four, it is important that the government sets aside an independent law that speaks about land-based investments,
right,
that speaks about the protection of land-based investments. And if all those are captured, then I think we shall take a step towards advancing or protecting the rights of the citizens and the casual workers when it comes to, or actually I left out one, the issue to do with the labor offices.
Yes.
What we have realized is that when you look at the budget that is given to these particular labor offices, it is still low. And I think maybe that is one of the reasons that even limits them. Even the number of the labor officers that we do have in our country at the moment is actually very low. And we cannot talk about protection and promotion of rights if we don't have remedy coming out.
If we are to increase the labor officers, ideally, how many should you say we should have?
We should have a ratio of 1 to 150 as recommended by the International Labour Organization. So in a community, but now you see we have just one labor officer per district. Some districts have over 1,000 of people. So if it is possible, we could actually have maybe a labor officer per parish, per sub-county. That way we could be able to at least be somewhere in between that ratio of 1 to 150 as recommended by the International Labour Organization. But right now we are still low. So through maybe the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, if the budget could be increased, I know there's the decentralization to the local governments, but it is important that we address that issue and empower the labor office themselves so that they can be able to defend the rights of the communities.
And that's what you meant earlier when you said that there's no political will, because if the budget is not given and it's not enough, if the employment of the labor officers is not enough, I think that demonstrates what you had talked about earlier.
Just to make it clear, we appreciate that there is actually political will on some issues. That is why, like I told you, we have right now the government has put in place the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. That manifests the political will that is in place.
Right.
But there are other instances where we have seen the government silent on most of these issues that we've been mentioning. And maybe we could say there's need for increased political will in addressing some of these issues. Because even that very issue of labor officers, the will is there. We have each one at the district level, but we are saying there is need to increase because of the capacity levels.
Okay, and you also talked about ignorance. I think in the first segment when we were talking about people not knowing maybe what their rights are or where to go. So if maybe someone is watching us here and they know someone who is working somewhere and the company clearly is not respecting their rights, where do they go? What are they supposed to do from here?
Okay. Wow. One thing, first of all, they are supposed to understand within the setting that they are in. If maybe it is a company that is operating in maybe a district like Kalangala, it is important that such victims that are facing these violations understand, first of all, who is in charge within that particular community. If it is maybe at a parish level, you need to understand who is that person of a first instance. Is it the LC2, so that their case or their outcry is taken out to that particular people. But two, where it is possible, reach out to certain organizations, because I understand that for us to be able to actually access services or justice, there is need for government to work together with the civil society.
Yeah.
Because like I talked about institutions like FIDA, I know that FIDA has a presence in most of these districts within Uganda. And I know that FIDA offers free services to maybe the women that are facing some of these challenges. So reach out to SEATINI, because we are also undertaking strategic litigation on behalf of most of these casual laborers that we think their rights are being violated. So reach out to whoever is within your reach, maybe at the subnational levels. I know that NGO Forum also has most of those branches within the communities. Reach out to them, and then maybe that could be a stepping stone for you to even be able to access the labor office, because maybe if there is only one labor office in an entire district, I can't say everyone will be able to access them, but at least there is that starting step that they could take, and then it will get them to the other.
Yeah, and I think because I was worried when you mentioned LC, we've also seen numerous reports where by the time, say, especially a foreign investor comes in, they've maybe bought out and bribed, and when you go to the LC, sometimes in some situations, you might actually now be putting your life in danger. So it's very important when you mentioned that there are also these other organizations that maybe, do you take the case anonymously when you do that? Do you investigate when someone brings the issue to you?
Exactly. We do understand the importance of research. So we don't just get into an issue. We take time to investigate, understand what is actually happening. Reach out to this community. Go to their particular communities and find out what is actually happening. Because it is also a very sensitive issue that you don't just want to engage in when you do not have the facts, because someone may mislead you. So for us, we understand the need for carrying out research, and it is something that we've actually done. With the research that we do, then it guides even on the next action, whether to take this matter to court, whether to maybe call for dialogue between the corporation and the victims, and see how they can be able to compensate those particular people. But we use all the available means to ensure that at least service is administered.
Okay, just to give us a rough idea, how many of such cases have you been able to, have you dealt with so far?
By cases, I don't know. Do you mean taking them to court?
Not necessarily, because you mentioned dialogue as well, or
yeah.
mediation to ensure that at least the rights of this person are respected.
Okay, like I stated earlier, we work within, we've actually at the moment worked with 5 particular districts where we have seen some of the largest plantations that are best, and at oftentimes, at least we get a chance like twice in a year to go to each of those communities. So we visit each of those communities at least twice a year, find out the next step. When we last went there, what it was, then we had dialogue, and now we go back to, find out what is actually happening now. Is there any improvement? And then sometimes, especially when it is a big group that is facing those challenges, then we look at, can we probably take on like the case to court?
Yeah,
and
I think
but
that
of course,
becomes easier when the group is bigger. Yeah?
Yes, because you cannot undertake public interest litigation on behalf of one person. It has to be maybe a particular big group, and where it is one person, we try to mitigate and look at how we can enforce this dialogue. I really can't state out just a particular number because we deal with quite a lot of communities. When we visit a district like Mbale or Mubende, we find a day to visit particular communities, not just to be stationed in one place. We go to different communities, and each community has different challenges that they do share with us. And then we look at how best we can be able to help maybe such communities so as to improve their livelihoods.
Have you noticed maybe any disparity in how enlightened certain communities are compared to others?
Very much.
Share with us what those findings are.
Let me try to give you an example. When we visited Mbale district, we realized that there's actually more enlightenment, more understanding of the rights, of the path they should take in case ABC has happened, and which is different from maybe when you go to Kalangala. I don't know if it's because of the setting, but we realized that, but also maybe because of the different people that, like I've told you, but they pick out from different communities, that it even becomes difficult for them to understand the community they are in.
Right.
Which even limits, and at the end of the day, they end up not being enlightened on certain issues.
So it's a sort of divide and conquer rule in Kalangala.
Especially when it comes to issues that deal with accessing remedy, which is a very, very important issue to address.
And then you mentioned 5 communities, so the ranking or the other findings that you found in Mbale, they know where to go to access.
No, not that they know, but at least there is increased awareness as opposed to maybe Kalangala, Mubende, Lila, Soroti. there's quite a difference. Yes.
So maybe that's something that we can investigate, which is a good thing. Find out what Mbale is doing right. Maybe it's to do with the leaders or maybe the education, and then you could use the same to take to other communities so that there's that path of enlightenment.
Yeah, actually, just in that line, one thing that we are trying out is to do the exposure and learning visits. Yeah, like I told you, we have a program on a project on coffee. So we say we need to look at improved livelihoods, improved coffee value chains. So what we do is maybe get a community from Mobende and take them to Mbale so that they learn the practices that those are undertaking, which actually, even when it comes to human rights, because we have different community monitors within these districts. So it is an initiative that we took upon ourselves so as to even ease access to maybe some of these services. We identified monitors in these particular communities that we are working with, for them to be the eye, to be the ones to look out in their particular communities. Because for us, maybe we are centered here, but for them, they are in the community every other day. They get to know what is actually taking place on ground. So through those, we carry out those exposure and learning visits for them to come to Mbale, like you've been suggesting, and then learn, get to understand what are they doing better, and then when they get back home, maybe they could be able to implement some of those things.
Indeed, some of those, I think that's a very interesting approach that you're taking. And then I'm always interested in the research that is done, because that helps us to go away from, hypothetical thinking, and maybe, because now you have the figures and concrete figures for what you're doing. We're still talking about advocating for human rights and the casual laborers. From the places that you've visited, what would you say are the percentages or comparison of plantations that employ men compared to women? I'm asking that in line with something you mentioned about vulnerability, like that place in Kalangala where they like to take workers whom they know will not maybe raise their voice. Do you find maybe an interest in taking more of the weaker gender, as it is called?
I don't know if the interest is majorly on in the line with the vulnerability, but I think that what has been long-standing is even when we have the different men and women in a certain community, most times what you find out is when you look at the kind of work they do, it is women that are usually at the low level. For instance, we have the men in the management, and we have the women being the ones maybe supplying the fertilizers on the farm. So I would say that you'll find that they're actually employing both, but maybe looking at the quality of work that they actually do, which is usually different. When you look at maybe some of these plantations we've visited, you realize that in most instances, it is women that are doing work that is at the bottom. They're the ones that have to do the list, and then management is usually taken up by the men. So it even, you'll find that in most instances, women actually more than men, because it is more of that work to do than top management, right, which is taken on by men.
Right, and that cuts across the different plantations and the different places that you have gone to.
Yes.
Yes. So Brenda is a program officer in charge of investment for sustainable development, and one of the reasons why she's having this conversation is she wants to see more women inclusion, because investment for sustainable development means that when we have more inclusion and more empowerment, then the incomes, even in households, do increase, right?
Yes, that is true, because it is the beginning of increasing livelihoods or the incomes that are within the households. And if you do not keenly address some of these issues, then it leaves that particular gap.
Okay, right. And we would like to thank you for making the time to be with us and for the recommendations that you've made. I believe that those who have ears have heard the action points right from the citizen to the local government to the, upper government, if we may call it, quote unquote, the domestic investors and foreign investors, I'd like to invite you to share your parting shots with anyone who is listening to us on what should be done. You could still link it to the realizations that you've made on why you started the campaign for the respect of the rights and dignity of casual workers.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Martha, for hosting me. Just not to leave it out, for us, we understand the importance of forefronting the rights of citizens, and that is why we have this particular campaign, because dignity and livelihoods of the people is what matters mostly. And that is why, actually, in line with maybe celebration of Women's Day, we've decided that instead of taking a day off as a public holiday, let's have a press conference. Let's address some of these issues. Let's put out our demands to the government so they could probably be heard and considered. And tomorrow we've organized a press conference together with the different organizations that we're working with to specifically have our voices put out there so that they can be heard. And I want to call upon each one of us, like I stated from the beginning, to take upon our responsibilities, to do what we're supposed to do, what we are mandated to do, for the government to put in place a framework that is favorable and for investments to be sustainable, but also for us to understand that it is our obligation to speak out whenever our rights are being violated. And don't just keep quiet. Understand that you have a voice, especially us as women. We can only uplift ourselves if we speak out. So it is important that we take it upon ourselves. And I believe that if we all do the same, then we shall be able to even elevate our country to a certain level from where it is today. Elevate our country
to a certain level. I like the passion that you have for investment, which I think, especially when we're talking about economic rights or rights and empowerment, is something that we don't usually look at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We leave out investment, yet it's actually a very important issue that we need to address.
Would you say it's because it sounds like a very complex subject, or maybe there's technical language that is used around it and that's why we don't usually take it up?
Well, maybe to some people it is because they find it as a complex issue. But I also think that the main reason is we don't understand the linkage between the two. We think that most people, when you talk about human rights, all they think about is maybe at the household levels, what the government is doing to the opposition. That is what human rights entails to most of us. But we need to look at it beyond just what is happening here. We understand that a country, for the growth of a country, you cannot leave out issues to do with trade and investment, because we are trading on a daily basis, we are investing on a daily basis. And if we don't pay key attention to human rights within trade and investment, then we are leaving out a very big component, and we are rather concentrating on maybe human rights at the different levels, human rights when we talk about politics, but we forget the main importance that we keep talking about Uganda, Vision 2040, we talk about elevating Uganda, but we can't do that if we have not invested. So meaning we are putting a lot of focus on investments. And if we put focus on the economic gain and we leave out the human rights aspect, then we are missing out the point, because we shall have the resources, but we shall not have the people, because their lives have not been forefronted.
Indeed. So that includes the health of the people, the well-being of the people, exactly. The social health.
The environmental aspect as well.
Right.
Yes.
Indeed. So that's homework for all of us as we go back into our normal work, and as we're still working, because I know some of you are watching from your workplaces. So thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us. This is CTV, Month of the Women, and we are keeping to our promise of bringing to you specialists and experts who are dealing in issues that affect our communities on a daily basis, to see that we address the issues of gender disparity in our community. And we'll continue to have these conversations even tomorrow. It's the same time. I thank you so much, Brenda, for making that time to be with us.
Thank you, Martha, for hosting me.
Yes, and I'm your host, Amelia Nakitimbo. Goodbye, don't blink.